Well, good evening, everyone. I hope that you had a productively restful afternoon and that you are ready to get into God's Word tonight. In Genesis 43 is where we're going to begin as we talk about how to stay shining with family. Stay shining with family. If you're visiting with us tonight, we're so glad that you are here. I want to set up the text in Genesis 43 by saying that it has been about 20 years since the sons of Israel had seen their brother Joseph. They sold him into slavery back when he was 17 years old, and they thought he was dead. They had no idea what had become of Joseph, and yet here they are, without knowing it, eating in Joseph's presence, eating at the very table of Joseph, and yet things have changed drastically because Joseph is now head over all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Listen to how this gathering goes, beginning in verse 26. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present which was in their hand and bowed to the ground before him. Then he asked them about their welfare and said, "Is your old father well, of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" And they said, "Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive." And they bowed down in homage. As he lifted his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, he said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." And Joseph hurried out, for he was deeply stirred over his brother, and he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, and he controlled himself and said, "Serve the meal." So they served him by himself, and them by themselves, and the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is loathsome to the Egyptians. Now they were seated before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth, and the men looked at one another in astonishment. And he took portions to them from his own table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. So they feasted and drank freely with him. The holiday season is typically the time when we get together with family members that we may not have seen for a very long time, at least for a year perhaps, if we're talking about Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's. And for some of you, that is a wonderful thing. For some of you, it's just a joy to get together with loved ones and catch up on what happened in the previous year. But for others, family gatherings can be awkward, painful, and uncomfortable, like this one in Genesis 43. There is so much history and bad blood seated at this table in Genesis 43. You have Joseph's brothers who are just plagued with guilt because of what they had done to Joseph. You have Joseph who must have been just heartbroken to see his brothers and to remember what they had done to him and selling him into slavery. And he's thinking about his father. He doesn't know how his father is. His father doesn't even know that he's alive. The brothers are confused and probably in fear because earlier in the text, we didn't talk about this, but if you remember from Genesis, earlier they had returned home and they found money in their sacks and they thought, how did this money get here? So when they returned, they were afraid they were going to be held accountable for stealing money from this high-ranking Egyptian official. It'd probably be a little bit hard to enjoy the food when you think you're about to be poisoned, or when you think that this Egyptian official is going to have you killed. And then there are these cultural differences so that Joseph and his brothers, they can't even eat together. They have to eat separately. I'm not exactly sure how that would have looked. And then you have Joseph getting emotional when he sees Benjamin for the first time in 20 years, so much so that he's got to leave the room to cry and to try to collect himself. This is the epitome of what you'd call an awkward family gathering. Yet Joseph remained a shining light for God in this account. And I recognize there are a lot of unique things about this family in Genesis, but you know and I know that sometimes family gatherings can be reminders of a painful past and can stir up all kinds of emotions that we've not felt in years, and if we're not careful, we can forget who we are in the Lord at family gatherings. And this month we're talking about being lights for Jesus Christ. And the truth is, there are few things in life with more power to snuff out our lives, our lights rather, than family members. So tonight I want to talk about how to keep our focus on the Lord and stay shining with family, to not allow family gatherings to darken our Christian lights and fill us with bitterness, anger, or malice. We must stay shining even when it's hard. And for some of you, the whole premise of the sermon may sound foreign and maybe even depressing, because you're thinking, I just love being with family. I love my family gatherings. I think that's just wonderful, and I wish that were the case for everyone. But I do know that this will be of help to some of you who may not have it so great this time of year, or so great when you have to gather together with family that you've not seen in a while. So I hope that this will be beneficial, no matter whether you enjoy your family gatherings or not. Hopefully you'll be able to glean from this lesson 5 ways to stay shining with family. First of all, remember that you are an adult now. Now, obviously, this point is actually directed toward adults. So if you're here and you're not an adult, I'm sorry, but tuck this away because you'll use it someday when you do become an adult. Remember, you're an adult now. In Genesis 43, Joseph is not a little kid anymore. He was in his 30s, which means his brothers no longer had the power over him that they used to, especially because of his new position in Egypt. In fact, the dynamic between them has so shifted that in verses 26 and 28, they bowed down to him in homage, which is ironic because you remember one of the main reasons they sold him into slavery? It's because he had that dream, multiple dreams really, of his brothers coming and bowing down to him. And those dreams are fulfilled here in this text. That's the way it is, folks, in life. Power dynamics between family members change over time. And that's a natural part of how God designed the family unit. We see this in Jesus' life. For instance, in Luke chapter 2, if you'll put a marker in Genesis 43, we'll be back there with each point. But in Luke chapter 2, in verse 51. This is when Jesus is a young boy. He's 12 years old, and we saw that instance at the temple where he stayed behind in Jerusalem. And then the text makes a comment in Luke 2 and verse 51 that he went down with them and came to Nazareth and continued in subjection to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. Well, consider a contrast between that text and Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, now that Jesus is all grown up. He's not 12 years old anymore, where he was in subjection to his parents. And now in Mark chapter 3, listen to what happens in verses 20 and 21. It says, and he came home, and the crowd gathered again, to such an extent that they could not even eat a meal. Verse 21, when his own people heard of this, they went out to take custody of him, for they were saying, he has lost his senses. So once Jesus was an adult, he wasn't in subjection to his own people anymore, to his parents like he used to be. He would still treat them with honor and respect, of course, but family members didn't get to tell him what to do anymore. We see that later in the text, beginning in verse 31 actually. Then his mother and his brothers arrived, and standing outside, they sent word to him and called him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you. And answering them, he said, who are my mother and my brothers? And looking about at those who were sitting around him, he said, behold, my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. Now, the text never tells us whether Jesus actually went outside to meet them. He probably eventually went outside to meet them. I don't know that for a fact, but what we do know from this text is that he did not just drop everything and leave. He did not say, sorry guys, I can't hang out with y'all anymore. I can't teach you anymore because my mommy wants me outside. No, the power dynamic shifted once Jesus became an adult. And here's why that is so important to remember. It's because being with family members can make us feel like a child again, and not in a good way. For several reasons. Maybe if the gathering is at the house you grew up in, you can have all these memories of childhood come flooding back. And again, for some of you, that's wonderful, and you had a great time as children, but there may also be those of us that it brings back painful memories. Or if your parents still have pictures all over the house and you got to go through and look at all those pictures of when you were a little kid and you had braces, or even worse, maybe a headgear, and you just remember you didn't have many friends, or you got picked on in school, or even if you were popular, maybe you start thinking about the mistakes that you made and the embarrassing things that you did as a child, and it can all come flooding back, put you in a terrible mood that'll make it hard for you to shine your Christian light. Secondly, your parents still may try to treat you like children. They may have your best interests at heart. They may still love you because no matter how old you are, you're still their baby, which is kind of endearing, but sometimes they can still treat you like a baby, and that's not good. They can try to tell you how to run your life, how to spend your money, how to raise your kids, or they can make you even, in some cases, feel silly for believing in God and try to tell you what you should and should not believe. No matter how old you are, your parents can still make you feel very small. And that can make it hard to stay shining for the Lord. And thirdly, of course, your siblings can treat you like a child. Your siblings may bring up all kinds of painful things from the past. They may still call you by the same nickname that they called you back in second grade. They may still play the same pranks, and that can be discouraging too. And when you feel like a child all over again, it's real tempting to start acting like a child. Maybe to start throwing little tantrums, or getting angry and raising our voices, or hurling insults, or storming out of the room. Or we might just shut down and just take it in silence while being filled with all kinds of resentment and hatred. Look in 1 Corinthians 13, please. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul makes a point, really, in passing, about our maturity. He's talking in the context about growing in the maturity of our revelation from God, that we're moving from spiritual gifts into some more perfect revelation. But he makes a statement right in the middle of the section. In 1 Corinthians 13:11, he says, "When I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. But when I became a man, I did away with childish things." And I think that's very important, especially for the Corinthian congregation, because a lot of them were acting like children. In fact, at the very next chapter, in verse 20 of chapter 14, he says, "Brethren, do not be children in your thinking, yet in evil be infants, but in your thinking be mature." So be innocent, morally speaking, like children, but in your thinking be mature. Remembering that we're an adult and that our family no longer has the power over us that they used to will allow us to let things go much easier. Feeling like a child makes us feel powerless, and so we may resort to childish things to try to regain that power. But as an adult, we're not powerless anymore. We can make choices. We can set boundaries. We can start, if we, for instance, start thinking about painful memories from our childhood, we can remind ourselves, that was then. This is now. I have the Lord now. I can press on with Him. Life is different now. It's not like the way it used to be. If our parents give some advice about how to run our lives, we can say, "Thank you, I'll take that into consideration," and then just move on and let it go. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Now, of course, if they are persistent with it and they keep on pressing, well, because we're adults, we can talk to them. We can say, "Mom, Dad, I love you, and I know that you love me, and you're just out for my best interest, but I'm an adult now, and I make the decisions about how I run my family and my life." If your siblings are all over you about something from the past, you can remember that was all in the past. It can't hurt you anymore, so you can laugh about it with them. Or if it still bothers you, you can say something like, "This subject is too painful for me. And if you're going to keep talking about it, I'm going to leave the room and I'll come back when you're finished." It's a very adult way to handle it. And they might be surprised and think you're strange for that, but so what? And I think this is the other key of remembering that you're an adult. As a child, you did everything that you could to gain your family's approval. You wanted to make your parents happy by obeying them. You may wanted your siblings to be happy, so you may have just kind of go along to get along, if you will. But now that you're an adult, you realize that's not your job. Your job is to love your family, but it's not about catering to their every whim anymore. In fact, imagine the scene in Genesis 43. If once they found out this was Joseph, his brothers ordered him to go back out in the field and fetch them some food like they used to when he was 17. Imagine how that would have gone for them. Not well. Or how about Jesus? Let me give you another example. In John 7. in John 7. Jesus' brothers had their own idea about how he should live his life and how he should basically go about doing God's will on the earth. And so they say to him that really he shouldn't hide. He should be more public if he really wants to be effective for his cause. And so in verse 4, they say to him, "For no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world." For not even his brothers were believing in him. So Jesus said to them, "My time is not yet here, but your time is always opportune." Notice, Jesus didn't really care what his brothers thought about him. Oh, he loved them. He wanted to be a good influence on them. But he wasn't going to let his brothers tell him how to run his life and where to go and how to do what he came to the earth to do. And he didn't act like a child about it either. He didn't say, "Well, you guys are always telling me what to do. Get away from me. Stop bothering me." He just said, No, my time's not here. That's not how this is going to work. If your family's overbearing and you feel the need to please them and seek their approval about every little thing, you're going to be miserable. It's going to be hard to shine your Christian light. But if you remember, you're an adult now, and the only one who calls the shots in your life is the Lord Jesus Christ. You'll have a much more peaceful time with your family members. Secondly, leave the past in the past. Leave the past in the past. Look back in Genesis 45. Genesis 45. Here we have this great revelation of Joseph to his brothers. And he can't take it anymore. He finally breaks down and tells them who he is. And watch how this goes in Genesis 45, verses 4 and 5. "And Joseph said to his brothers, 'Please come closer to me.' And they came closer, and he said, 'I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life.'" Joseph could have snapped his fingers and they would have all been dead. He could have looked them in the eye and said, "You remember me? It's payback time now." He didn't. He let it go. And he realized that God actually was using their horrible sin against him for good. And it may not be that our brothers and sisters sold us into slavery when we were kids, but they may have done some pretty cruel things to us, not just as a child, but maybe even recently as an adult. Maybe it wasn't so long ago one of our siblings got mad at us for something. They just hurled a ton of insults at us and hung up the phone. Whatever happened in the past, when we come together as a family, it'll help us to leave it there. And when I say leave it there, I don't mean to forget what happened. That's impossible. I mean to choose not to hold it against them. It's like the sermon Adam preached a while ago about Hebrews chapter 8, which is really a quotation of Jeremiah 31, where God says, "I will be merciful to their iniquities. I will remember their sins no more." God didn't just get amnesia and forget about their sins. What he's saying is, I'm not going to hold those sins against you. That's the very definition of mercy. He says, "I will be merciful to your iniquities. I will withhold the punishment that is due." That's exactly what Joseph does. He says, "I'm your brother whom you sold into Egypt." He remembered exactly what they did. But then he said, don't be angry about it anymore, because I've let it go. And I'm moving on. I'm not going to pay you back for it. Now here's where it gets hard, even harder. Because maybe you have a family member who has done you wrong, but they haven't asked for forgiveness at all. Maybe they have zero interest in restoring the relationship. In that case, we may not be able to forgive them in the fullest sense of the word. Forgiveness really involves reconciliation, but we can at least let go of the power that they hold over us by releasing the anger in our hearts toward them. I think Jesus shows us this on the cross. In Luke 23, verse 34, when he looks at the people who are crucifying him, and he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus turns this over to the Father. And I don't believe that Jesus fully forgave them in this moment, because you cannot fully forgive someone until the person repents. And these people were not repentant. They had no interest in reconciling the relationship. But what we do see here in Jesus is that he releases them from holding any power to fill him with hatred and bitterness. He lets go of their wrongdoing. He forgives them, but not in the fullest sense of the word, because they've not repented. But he has let go of their wrongdoing in his own heart and turns it over to the Father to let him deal with the forgiveness. You know, if this was full forgiveness, couldn't Jesus have looked at them and said, "Your sins are forgiven"? He did that with so many other people. But he doesn't do that here. He brings it to the Father, turns it over to him. Now later, if those people would repent and be baptized, like on the day of Pentecost of the preaching of the apostles, then Jesus could fully forgive them and have the full reconciliation. But in that moment on the cross, Jesus he had a forgiving heart and was releasing them from his mind and heart. We see this concept in Ephesians 4, verses 31 and 32, where Paul connects forgiveness to a release of anger and bitterness and malice. He says in Ephesians 4, verses 31 and 32, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you." If we don't forgive and release a stubborn family member's hold on our hearts, we'll be filled with too much bitterness and resentment to be a light when we're around them. This is very difficult, but we can do it because we're adults now. When you were a kid, you were powerless. Now you can choose to let go. You can accept, this is just the way my brother is. This is just the way that my sister is, and it breaks my heart that they don't want to be reconciled in this relationship, and I'm not going to allow their sin against me to darken my heart and fill me with hatred. And let me also say this, when I say leave the past in the past, I don't mean that talking about it is off limits. It may be that we need to talk to a family member about something that they have done wrong against us that's putting strain on the relationship, but do it in a private place. You know, sometimes you see it on the movies, right? They wait until they're gathered around the table to bring up something against a family member. That's not good, because then you're just going to embarrass that family member. You're not going to bring reconciliation. And when we're in private, it works perfectly with what Brother Adam said this morning. We could use the Philemon approach with them if they've wronged us in some way. And finally, let me flip this point around, because it could be that we are the guilty ones. It could be that we are Joseph's brothers, and we know that we did a family member wrong, and the gathering is going to be awkward and difficult because that person that we know we wronged will be there. And we'll have to confront them. We'll have to be in their presence. And the truth is, sometimes family members are the hardest to apologize to and seek forgiveness from. I think the battery's running low. Okay. It's much easier to admit that we're wrong to a friend or to a coworker than to admit that we were wrong to a sibling or somebody in our family, especially if it was a sibling that we were really close to growing up and we competed with a lot. It can be very hard to swallow our pride and admit that we're wrong. I know some people who, and not from this congregation, but I know somebody in particular who is so prideful and has such a hostility toward his own sister that he refuses to pick up the phone and call her. It's this idea that, well, she needs to call me. I'm not going to call her because she did this to me too. And remember, you're an adult now. And in those cases, be like Joseph's brothers, because I'll tell you, what they did to Joseph weighed heavily upon their hearts. So much so that every time something goes wrong in the text, they say, well, now God's punishing us for what we did to Joseph. They cared so much about what they did to him. They were eager for reconciliation. And we need to be too. You remember what Jesus says in Matthew 5? If you'll look there in Matthew 5, verses 23 and 24. Okay. 23 and 24. Therefore, if you're presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, Leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. He actually uses the word brother there, which it could just be brother in the sense of fellow Israelite, but how much more so our immediate brother? If someone in our own family has something against us, forget worship before we make reconciliation, or we try to reconcile with them and apologize for what we did, because they have something against us. When we come clean and clear the air with our family members by seeking that forgiveness, it'll make it so much easier to leave the past in the past and stay shining in our families. Thirdly, know your hot buttons. A hot button is a topic or issue that is highly charged emotionally. And there are some hot button issues that are hot buttons for everyone, like probably the current presidency, and especially before the election. That was just a hot button for everybody, no matter what view you took. But the truth is, we each have our own personal, private hot button issues that get us emotionally stirred and riled up. And guess who knows how to push those buttons better than anyone? Family members. Family members. In Genesis 43, verses 30 and 31, Benjamin was a hot button for Joseph. When he saw Benjamin, he just becomes so emotionally stirred, he can't even stay in the room. He has to leave and weep alone in his chamber. And of course, this is for good reasons. It's not like, there was a problem with this, but he wept because he hadn't seen Benjamin in so long. He loved his brother, and it just broke his heart. And he probably wept from relief that his brothers didn't sell Benjamin into slavery too, since he was the next youngest. But isn't it true? There are some things that come up at family gatherings that stir us emotionally. Sometimes those can be good emotions, like if you have a new grandchild, like some of you do, and you get to spend time and see the newborn. But sometimes our emotions can be stirred negatively because someone brings up a sensitive subject. Look in James chapter 1. In James chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. James 1, 19 and 20. This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Sometimes family gatherings can become all about comparison, because what does everybody want to know? They want to know what you did with your life over the previous year. And you start talking about that, and for some people in the family, there's some really good things. Maybe they got a promotion at work, maybe they just got married, maybe they just graduated with honors, and everybody's just so happy about that. But maybe there's some family members that they haven't really changed at all. Everything's just kind of the same. Or maybe some family members, things have gotten worse for them. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they got divorced. Maybe they're having trouble finding work. And what can happen is jealousy and competition among siblings can easily come to the surface. I call it comparison animosity. And maybe out of jealousy, those who aren't doing as well start to pick on those who are doing well, or vice versa. Maybe since there are some who are not doing well in the present, they start reminding their siblings about all of their failures in the past to make themselves feel better. Or maybe those who are doing well for themselves start making fun of their less fortunate siblings and saying things like, "You always were second best." And we can easily get sucked into that game. And our siblings can really push our buttons and send us over the edge. James says, "Be slow to anger, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God." We want to be lights in our families, but we don't want the light to come from the glow of rage on our foreheads. We don't want the light to come from easily flared tempers. So be aware of your hot buttons going in. And I'll tell you, if your family members are not Christians, I'll tell you right now, a hot button for you is going to be religion. And so prepare yourself for what happens if your family members start bad-mouthing Jesus, or start saying how ridiculous people are for believing in Christianity, or how silly and hypocritical the churchgoers are. What are you going to do? Are you going to just storm out of the room in a fit of rage? Are you going to just start insulting your family back and calling them dumb and calling them ridiculous? Or are you going to know that's going to be a sensitive topic? I need to be ready, maybe with some questions to ask. Maybe like, look, I know you all are against God, but have you ever read what Jesus did for us on the cross? Or questions like, what do you say about the empty tomb? How do you deal with the fact that all historians are agreed that Jesus' tomb was empty? Even the most liberal, the ones that just hate God, they do not disagree anymore that that tomb was empty. They try, they used to. They don't make that argument anymore. Everyone agrees it's empty. How do you explain it? Or if you're sensitive about politics, or if you're insecure about your current situation in life or some childhood memory, be prepared for how you'll respond if people start giving you a hard time about those things. Now, again, in a loving Christian home, there shouldn't be any of this. And I'm hoping that some of you are thinking, this sermon is just the worst sermon ever because it's so terribly inaccurate. My family is nothing like this. I really hope that that's the case for you. But the truth is, not all of our family members are Christians. And they don't all live by the same standards. And sometimes the things that we're seeing on TV that make for good drama are realities for some of us when we get together with our families. And that's sad, but it's true, and we need to be prepared to be slow to anger and not allow family members to push our buttons so we can stay shining with family. Fourth, don't overpressure yourself to convert them. Fortunately, Joseph did not really have to change his brothers because by the time his brothers sat down to eat at his table, they were already changed. They had already been filled with regret about their sin toward Joseph, filled with regret about what they had done in the sight of God. But in our families, there may be some who are not sorry for their sins at all and who have not given their lives to the Lord. And for that reason, we might make it our mission to try to convert them at the family gathering. I think that's commendable because we want more than anything, of course, to bring our families to Jesus. But there is a great irony in life, and that is that our family members are the ones we want most to convert, yet they are at the same time the hardest to change. And we see that in Jesus' life. Look in Mark 6, please. Mark chapter 6. We actually saw earlier in John 7 how Jesus hadn't even converted his own brothers. And here he goes in Mark 6 to his hometown, Nazareth. And it doesn't go well there at all. This is the Son of God, and watch how it goes for him. In verse 2, beginning, when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogues, and the many listeners were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? And what is this wisdom given to him, and such miracles as these performed by his hand? Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James, and Joseph, and Judas, and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown, and among his own relatives, and in his own household." And he could do no miracle there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he wondered at their unbelief. We should absolutely make the most of every opportunity to influence our families for the Lord. But sometimes, and believe me, I know this from experience, I come home from family gatherings beating myself up because I didn't say the right thing, or I didn't do the right thing, or I didn't have the right timing, or I just didn't have the right tone in my voice because I'm upset because when I came back, they weren't all Christians, or none of them were Christians when I came back. And it can be tempting to overanalyze every conversation with them to the point where we've put so much pressure on ourselves. Instead of being a light for Jesus, we just end up discouraged and downtrodden the whole time because we can't seem to change our family members' minds. It's hard to do that. It is hard. Not even Jesus had success in this arena until after he died and rose from the dead. We know his brothers, some of them came to the Lord later. It is possible to convert our families, but there are so many things working against us. It's going to take, generally speaking, a lot longer to convert family members than those who are not our family. It's going to take many, many more conversations, many, many more gatherings. And if our sole mission is to go down for Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's and convert our whole family, we're setting ourselves up for a lot of heartache and frustration. It's going to be hard to keep shining, but if we will keep the faith and we will keep shining for the Lord, keep serving the Lord, if they have the right heart, they will come around eventually. And fifth and finally, take some time alone. Remember back in Genesis 43, verse 30, that Joseph actually left the room to go regroup. Says he had to go in his own chamber. Says he washed his face, and he waited until he could control himself before he came back and served the meal. How many times did Jesus do that? Keith talked to us about that this morning. How many times Jesus would get away from the crowds and just go be alone with his Father in prayer. So many examples of that. I love the one in John 6. In John 6, because in the other examples, Jesus would kind of get up early in the morning and go out to be by himself, or sometimes he would take the disciples with him. But in John 6, there's so much commotion going on. He just fed 5,000 people, and it says in verse 15, Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. He leaves this whole crowd that wants to make him king. He even leaves his disciples, and he goes off just by himself, with he and his Father. Remember, you're an adult now. When you were a child, if you wanted to go be off by yourself, you had to ask for permission. And what happened? Your parents probably sent somebody with you to go be by yourself with someone else. Now you can just say, I need some fresh air, and go sit down on the porch on your own. People might think that's odd, but you're an adult now. It's okay. It's okay to do that. It's okay to take care of your needs and set boundaries. And here's the point of this. Sometimes, in order to stay shining, we have to recharge our lights by spending alone time with the light of the world in prayer. Especially if your family members are not Christians and they're pushing our hot buttons and they're bringing up the past, it's okay to take time alone to regroup with your Lord and Savior. That may mean renting a car so you can go out for a drive if things get too overwhelming. It may mean planning a vacation with just you and your spouse the week after your family gathering so that you two can regroup. It may just mean that you go to bed a little earlier than everyone else so that you can pray and be alone reading in your room. It may mean waking up earlier than everyone else to read Scripture and refocus. You see, because Joseph remained a light for God in a dark situation, the awkward family gathering in Genesis 43 became a joyous celebration that brought peace to the Israelite family, and it changed the course of history forever. And God can use our lights in our families for His divine purpose too, if we will commit to stay shining with family. Do you have your songbooks? I'm going to sing a song encouraging you to come to the light of the world tonight. Allow Him to purify and cleanse your sins because of the blood that He shed for you on the cross. If you're willing to humbly bow before Him this morning or this evening, repenting, confessing Him as Lord, and being baptized for the remission of your sins, you can have His light in you that you can share with the world. And if you've done that already and you've wandered off into darkness, come back to the light. He wants you so much to come back to His presence. And we're here to pray with you and for you to help make that happen. If you have any spiritual need tonight, come forward, let us know. While we stand and sing.